Hello, everybody. I am extremely excited, well, as usual, but I'm even more excited today to welcome Sarah Olivieri, the person I like to call my business BFF, one of the first people I ever worked with, and just someone that I deeply, deeply respect as an entrepreneur. Welcome, Sarah.
Oh, it's so good to be here. You know, I feel like you and I live on far ends of a continent, but I always feel like we're so close, and it's great to share some of what we do together with the rest of the world.
Yes, I know. I mean, we chat regularly and kind of keep up to date on what's going on with each other's businesses. But honestly, like I feel like I get the opportunity today to just like dig into things, and everyone else gets to benefit from it, but I get to play and just enjoy this time with you chatting. So that's great for me. I'm stoked. All right. So we're going to start out with the same questions we always start with, and I have an inkling of what you're going to say, but I'd love for the rest of the world to hear it too. What would you say your superpower in this world is, Sarah, in business or not?
Yeah, so we'll see if it matches what you thought. Everybody, let's see, does Say know what Sarah's gonna say? So I think probably my biggest superpower is to really grab information from various locations and pull that together into an organized, straightforward, simple structure or process that can really move somebody forward, kind of in any area, whether it's in business or your personal life, or one of my personal passions is sailing. So that's my superpower. Did you guess it?
Oh, I was close. I was thinking like practical, actionable insight, which is, I think, overlaps very, very strongly. It was just half of it.
Absolutely. That's what I end up with, but that's my process that I'm really good at. And that's how I end up with, practical, actionable insights, pulling it from many, many diverse locations.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I feel like for me, it's taking things that are like really confusing and doing that similar thing, even if it's from one location. But anyway, next question. Why does the world need this superpower? Why does the world need what you do?
Well, I think, there's a couple reasons, but especially having to do with business, right? There's lots of ways in which human beings come together to do stuff together. My favorite way that people do that is business, really. And specifically, I work with nonprofits. They're extra complex and dynamic, but it's really the same kind of thing going on. And the trick about people coming together is humans are dynamic on their own, and get a group of them together and you got all sorts of stuff going on. So if you can't make something really actionable and really clear and really distilled, you're going to get miscommunication, confusion, and misalignment. And there's one thing I do a little training on delegating. And one of the things I like to say that I don't think a lot of people say is, I just assume in the world that we miscommunicate. That's the norm. You say something comes out of your mouth and the other person maybe is getting 20% of what you're trying to say. And it's only with a great bit of intention and luck that we manage to actually communicate something from our head pretty completely into somebody else's head.
Yeah, I cannot argue with that at all. Even as someone who specializes in communication, I think it's even more evident, or perhaps that's what I'm trying to say, is that to us people who specialize in communication, the evidence of how much work it takes to actually make it successful, it becomes very obvious and very challenging. So you work in the nonprofit world primarily and have for many, many years. I know this is one of the things that we first bonded on because I too have done quite a bit of work in my local nonprofits. And one of the main things that you do in nonprofits is help them, basically do what your superpower is. And one of the most valuable outcomes of that, I think, is tackling burnout. Now, tackling burnout is huge. Anyone who's listened to this podcast knows that it is huge to me as on a personal level because it's huge in our industry. And I think that it's also very, very widespread in the nonprofit industry as well. So, why do you think people get so burnt out? Like, why is this such a thing?
Wow. One is certainly this is true in the nonprofit space, and I think it's really true for most entrepreneurs and visionary types, is most nonprofit people, most entrepreneurs are heart driven. And when your heart is in it, it is hard not to attend to every little thing because you care so much.
So much. Oh gosh, it's too real.
So you get sucked in, but before you know it, something bad happens. And that's you end up taking on so much you become inefficient. I like to think of it as you weight your own ship down and it starts to sink. And in fact, speaking of ships, there's a phenomenon in any boat, anything moving through the water, the thing literally makes a hole in the water and you get a mountain on either side of the boat. It's actually a wave, but if you think of it as a mountain, and the faster the thing goes, the bigger the mountain gets and the deeper the hole, because the hole is getting deeper and deeper. And most boats, many boats can only, the longer they are, the faster they can go, but they have a maximum speed. It's called hull speed because their ability to go faster just decreases because they're hitting this mountain in front of them unless they change the design of their boat in a very special way. And I'm very much about encouraging nonprofits, and so true for business owners too. You have to change your approach so that you can climb over that mountain, not be constantly at the bottom of it, pushing against it. And then you can go as fast as you want, and you're not having all this resistance and drag in your way.
Oh, that's a great answer.
But you're
that's a
making
great answer,
the
great
drag,
analogy.
right?
Yeah.
It's like too much on your plate. You're making the drag, so don't do that.
So what are some of the ways to get over that mountain and reduce that drag? You mentioned, not doing quite so much on your own, not putting quite so much on your own plate. What are some other ways that people can overcome that barrier?
Yeah. So, I'll give you some real kind of in the trenches specifics, but it all boils down to one thing. It's called focus. Focus leads to everything great. I'll tell you what it leads to, and then I'll give you some specifics of how you can focus. And I heard a version of this from a pretty well-known business consultant, and I tweaked it a bit tweaking processes, that's me. And it's that the reason why focus is the key thing to focus on is when you have focus, you get clarity in what you're doing. And when you have clarity with what you're doing, you can gain perspective of where what you're doing fits into everything else. And when you have perspective, you can feel certainty. And when you are certain with what you're doing, you're going to feel super calm, but also you're going to gain other people's trust. And when you have clients who trust you and team members who trust you, family members who trust you, friends who trust you, the world is a way better place. But the whole trick of getting to trust really starts with focus. So focus on focusing. So what are some ways that I encourage people to focus? Really be mindful of, have your big goals, and nonprofits have the biggest of big goals. But break those down into meaningful things. I like to break any project that you're doing on into a piece that can be done within 2 weeks, and only focus on that piece during those 2 weeks. Then you can stop and review. But if you let the whole world of big goals onto your plate, down you go. So just take what you can eat. It's just like going back. Take what you can eat now, and when you go back for seconds, that will be great. You'll be like, awesome, and you'll be eating so much, you'll be getting crazy fat. But if you take too much, you will not even have the opportunity to get that momentum.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense to me. And it's funny that, we're overrunning our different businesses and things are evolving, because what you're saying reminds me so much of the growth strategy planner that we put together for that exact same reason, is that we found that, in our case, it's maybe not as often in the nonprofit world, but the weight of all of your ideas and plans and different things that you're trying to do, more is not always better. So what I'm hearing from you is that that's not to say that you can't have those big, massive goals, but you need to get there in small, edible chunks, small, manageable chunks, and really just place those one in front of the other and focus on the one so that you can understand the perspective of where it fits into all of the other things and that you can get to those other things in time. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. And, how do you have less on your plate? Ideally, and I recommend this for any business owner, if it's just you, get a second person, whether it's an assistant or you hire a contractor or you work with another team. It really can't be just you. So you have somebody to delegate to. Another form of delegation, though, is through systems and processes and automation. So you can reduce your workload by putting things, simplifying things. I'll give you a quick, simple tip on business owner. I was just tasked with what are some things that take time that I can reduce the amount of time they take by simplifying them. And I used to spend pretty organized, and I spent a while, every month I would organize my files, my paperwork, right? And I had like each account had its own file folder, and I'd stick it in there. And I said, well, this is taking too much time. And I switched to a system. I was like, okay, I know what to do. It took me about 15 minutes to come up with this. I said, okay, all of my bank statements are going in one folder, all other statements are going in another folder, and everything else goes in a third folder. And so now I only have 3 folders to divide things into, and it takes, like probably less than 1/10 of the time that it used to. And I have all the organization I need in case, I'm ever audited or something. But that was a simple change that really simplified. And the third thing I get asked all the time from nonprofits is, well, what if I don't have anybody to delegate to and I don't know how to do systems and processes, which you can figure out. You totally can. But if all of that, if you have nothing else but yourself, you have to take stuff off your plate and you can put it in. And I now have a visual. I have 2 visuals. For those of you who are watching, this is my gift. This is a metal fireproof garbage can, and you can put your discarded things off your plate in here, and they may set fire, but they'll be perfectly contained, and you can ignore them because they're safe just burning themselves out in the corner. But you have to get some stuff off your plate or you're not going to get through it.
Yeah, that's one of those things that sounds simple, but isn't always easy.
It's an emotional block, but you cannot do something. You can drop a ball. You can.
Yeah, one of the most powerful things that you ever said to me, and I think I'm not sure you were even saying it to me, but it was something I heard you say, which is that there are just some fires that you have to let burn to the ground. And that just stuck with me. And I tell myself that sometimes. And it reminds me that even though you want to be perfect, you want to follow through on everything, you want to do all of the things, that sometimes the most important thing you can do in order to be really, really good at the most important thing is to just say no to some other things, even if that means that they catch on fire. So yeah, I'm speaking here, heard this several years ago. If you out there are listening to that and thinking like, oh my God, but won't that like cause my whole business to burn? Well, there are some fires that no, you can't let burn, but a surprising amount of them you can, as long as you're keeping focused on the most important stuff.
Yeah. And that's scary, but it's true. Trust me, you can do it.
Yes. We have lived this stuff, guys. And on the topic of, teams and delegating and having other people to support you. So one topic that we get asked about a lot, and so we talk about a lot, is hiring and team size and how to navigate that and how to even decide what size team you want. Sometimes you just think, I could do everything myself. And sometimes you're like, man, I want a team of like 15 people to do everything for me. And you, of course, as our audience maybe isn't aware of, but I am. Over the course of the time we've known each other, your business has evolved a lot, and you've been in a lot of those different configurations of team. A few years ago, you did have a big team. At one point, you just had, small team, but satellite network of awesome contractors. And now you're back down to just you and an assistant primarily. So how did you navigate those decisions, and why did you decide to come back to being this kind of like micro team?
Yeah, I like that term, micro team. And I was recently on a panel that was asked to be about solopreneurs. And I'm like, I am not a solopreneur. But we ended up changing the topic of the panel because there were other people like me, and we made the topic right sizing your business. And
I love that.
Yeah. So I have been, I have been a solo operator when I was first starting out, and I said that has to change. So I grew a team, 1 internal person, 2 internal people. Then I added some contractors. The biggest I got was like, I think 5 internal people and a dozen or 13 agency partners who I worked with regularly, and Say's company was one of them. And then I started shifting my business model, and I shed the agency partners and I shed the internal team to the point where I was down to just me and an assistant. But we are doing more business than we ever have with this new model. So your question was, right, how do I decide that? You have to really think about what you need in place. And it's an evolution, right? Your evolution of scaling your business isn't necessarily continually growing your team, right? And I think there's a lot of that process where, and I advise people to hire experts regularly as they're going through a growth spurt. So you get the expert to help you level up what you're doing and create the system that you need. And sometimes that system needs another person, but a lot of the time you can automate a lot of it. So over the years, certain processes I was streamlining and automating. I like to use the word augmentation. People don't use that a lot, but it's like half automated, half a person. So I use some example of how I use my assistant. I have a lot of scheduling. I work with executive directors. They're notoriously busy. Scheduling with them was challenging. So I use a scheduling tool. And I use another tool that helps me follow up with them manually, but it reminds me to follow up and tells me what time, but it doesn't really tell me, it tells my assistant. So my assistant does the last few manual pieces, giving it the human touch, but the technology is spoon feeding her. So it takes her very little human time to make it like a very high quality human impact. And I'm not touching it, but the amount of work, I was actually just thinking just a few minutes ago, my assistant is struggling to get to 20 hours a week because everything, but she does a massive amount of work. She's running my social media. She's doing a lot of my writing for me. She answers most of my emails. She does all of my scheduling. She's applying for podcasts and webinars. And our interaction, that's, we have a weekly meeting to check in and I answer questions for her. And she's doing all of that in a relatively short amount of time because we have everything systematized, automated as much as possible, and processes in place. Oh, and she does my bookkeeping now too, also, which was previously streamlined.
Wow. So basically what I'm hearing from you is that you evolved to being able to run things with fewer people much more efficiently because you have maybe not entirely, but partially because you have hired experts, worked with experts, discovered processes that really worked, identified places you could automate or augmentate, as you said. I really like that. I was interviewing a gentleman about automation just last week, and he was talking about that kind of halfway zone, and there's a lot you can do there. So I'm hearing that basically all that same level of work that previously maybe took more people on the team was happening. You've just figured out ways to kind of like shift and simplify so that the bulk of it can be done just by the two of you. One person I'm hearing more for the grunt work, so to speak, in terms of like stuff that needs to be done at a certain time that can just be nudged, and you're doing more of the kind of strategic consultative work. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and I don't want anybody to think that it just happened overnight. This is probably, over about 3 years, kind of one thing at a time. Probably the longest piece, and, was figuring out what kind of service I really wanted to do. And I tried a few different things,
question.
Right? So that was like kind of mission number one, figure out what is it that I really wanted to put out there in the world. And then the next thing was figuring out, how do I actually close sales on this? Because selling to nonprofits, selling is something, it wasn't not something I'd never studied. So I started studying it, and that helped me realize how selling to nonprofits is like one of the hardest things you can possibly do, because, they say, talk to the decision maker. Well, sometimes there is no decision maker, and it's a group of people and they're not used to buying things. And it's like, I don't even want to go all the way into it. So so first was, what am I really selling? Next was how do I actually sell this and refine? I spent a whole year refining my sales process, getting my pricing right, getting the explanations, the whole system in place. And then it was, marketing. Now this year has been all about literally my goal. Because sometimes, right, your goal is get this or get that. But my goal this year related to marketing is run controlled marketing experiments until you start getting consistent results. And I've now just achieved getting consistent results and about to level everything up. And there's always work to do in marketing, right? But until you really know what you're selling and how to sell it, your marketing is only going to go so far.
Yeah, agreed. And I'd actually love to tackle all three of these topics, maybe vaguely in that order. So just at a high level, what it is that you're selling, so your service has kind of evolved over that time, and then how your sales cycle has evolved over that time, and then maybe if we have some time, how you're marketing, what it is that you do for marketing. Basically, how do you do it all as one person with an assistant who is barely able to fill 20 hours a week? But let's start with the service. So how has the service that you offer evolved? Because your impact and kind of your vision has stayed relatively similar, at least as far as I'm concerned. Correct me if I'm wrong, but how has what you do, maybe you could tell us, how that's evolved.
Yeah, and that's true about me. It's true about most nonprofits I work with, even really old ones. Their core mission, your core mission as a human being, what brings you purpose in the world rarely changes, right? But the context in which you choose to make that come to fruition, or that you're able to make that come to fruition, can change a lot. So, my kind of business mission from very early on, I was focused on nonprofits, and it was always about helping them make a bigger impact. But initially, I had been a nonprofit director. I'd moved into marketing, and I was building a marketing agency when I met Say. And the marketing agency was focused on marketing to help nonprofits make a bigger impact. But I started kind of getting into the weeds because the nonprofits had organizational and system issues that got in our way. And finally, I realized that the work we could even do if that stuff wasn't in our way was barely worth doing, because most of their nonprofits, their systems would just collapse if we put any sort of serious attention on them. If they could move as fast and had the budgets they needed, they would just be smushed. So, I got lucky in that it was actually a client who recognized that I had this talent for business systems and asked me to come and work with their team. I'm sure I would have gotten to that eventually. So the fast part was that a client recognized it, but that, sometimes you're pulling your business forward and sometimes you're running to catch up with your business as fast as you can, right? So all of a sudden, and say you were there, you saw me do this, I was running to catch up with what is this thing we're doing? I know it's in there. I know it has to do with impact. I know it has to do with, shaping up nonprofits so they can actually do something. And it literally was, probably, I don't know, 9 months into like grappling with this and revising our products and services, which was complex because we had all these partner agencies, and sky was the limit really in what we could offer. Because, we had, say, content strategy agency. I had a Google AdWords agency. I had a social media agency, like anything I wanted. I had a web development agency. Like I could have anything I wanted, but it was, what was that thing that was really, right for me and what I wanted to do with my business. And it really came to me like late at night. And I was saying to myself, which is now kind of our core belief as a business, is there's gotta be a better way. There's gotta be a better way. And I was like a mad woman with the papers at the kitchen table, and I'm scribbling away and reorganizing things. And I birthed, and I remember it was like the next day, I was like, I made a thing, and it's called the impact method, and it is a system for nonprofits to run off of. And that's when I was like, okay, I have a thing now, but it still took me a long time to figure out how to package up the thing and to be ready to let go, right? Even it's hard for me to let go things on my plate, to let go of all the things that it wasn't or that I didn't need to do.
Yeah, or all the potential that you were choosing to lay aside to go on this route, I find letting go of potential, when I can see the potential, is really scary, even though you gotta sometimes,
So scary. I think sometimes I'm a big believer in creating constraints for yourself and making rules. Like I have a rule, if I have unfolded laundry, I'm not allowed to wash more clothes until I finish folding my other laundry.
Rule.
Right? Or sometimes I just, wear the clothes out of the basket to avoid folding them. But same, in business, I finally created a rule for myself, which was that my business is not an implementing business. And that was hard for me because I really believe in skin in the game. So it took a bit to figure out, how can I have skin in the game with my clients, but say we draw the line at implementing. So I'm always getting pulled in that marketing direction. I'll tell you about how to do it. I'll help you build marketing capacity. I'll help you make a hire, but I'm not gonna design your full marketing campaign. I'm not gonna implement it for you. I'm not gonna write it for you. I'm not gonna build your website.
Awesome. I think that is so cool and so empowering that through this journey, even having all the different potential of all the different services, all the different done for you things you could do, you realize that your greatest impact is actually not in doing that stuff yourself, but in helping them navigate how to do it where they're at and build the capacity that they need to do it. Because I know capacity is just that wall so often that gets run into with nonprofits. So that's really, really cool. Thank you for sharing. And so the sales cycle, you mentioned that it can be challenging when you don't really know who the decision maker is and they don't really know who the decision maker is, or there's multiple decision makers. So how did you navigate that hurdle?
Wow, it feels a little fuzzy because I feel like I tried so many things. You know this. I banged my head up against so many walls. And now it's working. And even to this day, like I always go back, I'm not ever satisfied with it's working. I have to know why it's working. And right now I know what it's working, what is working. So one is, I educated myself on sales, right? If you're struggling with sales, read some sales books. Like it's not rocket science and people have figured it out before you. I think one of the first really helpful authors I read was, I'm going to mess up his name, Blunt, I think. We can put it in the show notes. I'll send you his Sales IQ, I think, is one of his books. And then more recently, I read The Challenger Sale. There were certainly other sales books I read along the way. But so step one was like educating myself and owning it. Probably the pre-step one was say, okay, nothing else until we figure out this problem. And that was tricky, right? Because I had to keep enough marketing to have sales calls to run experiments, but it's hard to do much marketing when you can't close a deal. So it's kind of like it can be a downward spiral. So it didn't feel great, but I kept at it. So, having a great consultation call and getting good at doing consultations. So initially I learned some like frameworks and scripts, but the truth is it became, once I practiced it enough, it became relaxed and easy. Another thing I did was I got really in touch with the nonprofit sector is super sensitive to the concept of being sold anything. So I chilled everything out. I made my consultation calls a real consultation. And oftentimes I don't even tell them what I do. And we get towards the end of the call, I'm either like, so what can I do for you? Or is there anything you want to know? And sometimes people get on those calls and they're like, I read about the impact method, I want it, how do I get it? And that's great. That's partly a product of good marketing. It's mostly, I think, a product of when I have a client who's a really good fit. And I now have the right product that I'm offering. So, that kind of process of consultative selling, but also really starting to, rather than wait for my clients just to tell me what their problems are, I now take an approach where I say, these are the problems I usually see. Is this you? And that feels so much better to me too, because there's no sense in making them feel alone or jump through the hoops of telling you like what their problems are when you already know, because they're nervous about it and it's hard for them to tell you. It's so much easier when they feel like, I'm not the only one. Everybody's having this problem. Like people want to feel unique in their solutions, but they do not want to feel unique in their problems.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And that's something I have experienced even from the other side of it, is when you talk to somebody or read something where it feels like they really, really just get what you're going through. And maybe you were struggling to even put it into words. It's like, oh my gosh, you understand. Can you fix it? Can you fix it?
Right. I literally was on a sales call earlier today and this executive director says to me like, am I crazy? Am I the only one who's ever been in this situation? I'm like, girl, everybody I talk to is in the exact same situation you're in. And in the nonprofit world, one of those situations is executive directors have no management training and they've never been an executive director before. Like that's super, super common. And they're feeling like the things that many business owners feel many times over, imposter syndrome, like they have no clue what they're doing, they don't belong there, everybody else is doing it better. And just like in the for-profit world, we're all figuring it out as we go for the most part.
Yeah, what do you know? Empathy and compassion have a really strong place in terms of building trust and communicating value. Who would have guessed?
And, the very first thing I learned about sales when I was working one-on-one, when I started kind of creating a process around solving nonprofits' problems before I had the impact method, my biggest sales trick was nonprofits coming to me and saying, we have all these problems, we have no idea how to fix it, can you help us? And in my head, I'm going, geez, I got no idea. Like, this sounds terrifyingly huge and complicated. And I would just come out with my confident self and say, yeah, that sounds really complicated. I have no idea how to solve your problem, but what I do have is a process that seems to figure these kinds of things out every time I use it. And I know the process and I'd be happy to take you through the process. And I'm pretty sure when we're done working together, we'll know how to solve your problem. And that vulnerability combined with confidence, that builds trust fast. But it's scary at first, right? To sit down and say to the client who comes to you as an expert, well, I got no idea.
Yeah, but at the same time, what I'm hearing is that even though it's terrifying and maybe giving voice to a bit of that imposter syndrome as well, is that you're still creating that empathy where it's like, look, I'm not pretending to have all the answers to this big, huge, complicated thing you've been banging your head against the wall over for maybe years. But, you know, here's what I can do. And what I'm hearing is that you stating kind of the problems or sharing the problems that you can help fix that they might be going through is kind of like an advanced version of that where you're saying, look, I don't solve everything in the world, but if you're experiencing these particular things, then I have a process that has worked for other people and it might work for you too.
Exactly, exactly. And I think, you know, that's one of the things, you know, there's many great, I'm a big believer in systems and there's many great systems, but there's some things that come with time and experience. And, you know, I think putting things into context can really give people inspiration. Like, you know, if you talk to any great salesperson, they're going to, and you ask them how many no's do you get every day, they get majority no's. And to just, you know, if you're struggling with sales, I'd say set yourself a goal of how many no's you can get. Forget about the yeses. Just go for the no's. Can you swallow 50 no's, 100 no's? Like, set that as your goal and you will gain along the way the rest of what you need to come across and build trust. Because you need that certainty, right? If you don't have certainty, you're not going to get trust. And if you're scared of a no, then you're not going to be certain. And you know, the certainty in sales, I think, comes from knowing that you're okay, regardless of whether or not you get a yes or a no.
Oh, I like that a lot. And I think that actually extends to a lot of different other things, including relationships in general. And of course, a sales relationship is still a relationship. But this reminds me a lot of kind of my big realizations of the year, which is around failing fast. And I know, Sarah, I've shared some of my experiences around failing fast with you. But one of the things that we've realized is that done is the new perfect is not enough. You have to be sometimes like aiming to fail, not to give up, but aiming to fail so that you can understand that failure, face it, swallow it, move on, and understand that you will succeed if you keep moving forward. And that's what I'm hearing around the whole concept of not being afraid of no's, is that if you're not afraid to fail, then you can keep improving and going forward until you succeed. But if you're afraid to fail, then you're not really going to try, and you're not really going to be able to analyze because you're going to be too busy freaking out, you know, because you got the no or you failed or whatever. And you're going to be holding yourself back from your full potential. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's a perfect segue into how do I do marketing with such a small team? And this was a double whammy for me, right? Because I went from having like the dream team of agencies that I could pull from. And literally I got to meet with those agency owners almost every week and ask questions too. I was pretty spoiled. To part of, you know, my own running to catch up with my own train and my product meant that I had a serious long period of a dip in sales because I wasn't clear on what I was selling, but I was so passion driven. I couldn't keep the old thing. I had to get the new thing figured out. And so I had a cash crunch on top of it. So I had to figure it out. And the big thing that I realized for myself and that I now teach a lot of people, and this really has to do with right sizing your marketing as well for your team, is forget about all the marketing tactics in the world and strategies and social media and email and your website and even your content for just a minute. And ask yourself, what stage of development am I in my marketing activities? And different activities, you might be at different stages, but the first stage is really, I call it flexing the muscle. Can you post any post on social media every day for a week? Can you do it? You know, can you write a blog post consistently, weekly? Like, what can you do and what is your ability to do it with consistency? So before you think about marketing strategy, you have to flex some marketing muscles, build a little strength, and know where you're strong and where you're not. And until you have, once you find a place that you're strong in and you can do it with consistency, then you can look out into the world and say, okay, what proven successful marketing tactics work related to the things I'm capable of doing? And then once you do those, you can keep building your other muscles, and you can say, of those things that I'm capable of doing, I'm going to run some experiments in that realm, and I'm going to find the things that work for me. And once you're done running some experiments to find out what works, that's level 2, you can reach level 3 with those activities, where you level up or you scale up those activities, meaning you're, investing. That's when you say, okay, now I'm going to hire a professional marketing team to manage some of this, or I'm going to spend money on ads, or whatever it is, you level it up. And sometimes if you have enough cash, I recommend, while you're figuring out what works, that you hire an expert, someone who's great at marketing strategy, to help you figure it out. But if you go to that expert and say, this is what I'm capable of, will you make me a strategy that leverages my capabilities? You will get a much, much greater value for what you spend. And the person you work with is going to like working with you better too, because I can say this as well as I can, but no marketer wants to work with somebody who isn't going to carry out their end of the deal.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Just once again, it's funny because we haven't officially worked together in well over a year now. But I feel like we've evolved in similar ways, because this is exactly what the same realization that I've come to. And part of the reason that we came up with our growth strategy model is because, first of all, you just have to figure out if you can do something. What can you do? For example, I've been a professional writer for 15 plus years, but if you ask me to sit down and, for my own business, write a blog post every single week or multiple times a week or something like that, I have ADHD and I struggle to do things sometimes for my own deadlines. But if you ask me to sit down and record some quick videos that other people can release, or spend a day doing podcast episodes that are primarily audio and I can be on, and then use that, oh my gosh, that works so much better for me. And meanwhile, my team, who has all these other support things, we can then build stuff around this. And this is really what we found for clients as well, right? Is that this growth strategy idea, which is this constraining document that basically brings clarity, accountability, and consistency. Sound familiar? People always ask us. And when I first brought it up to the strategists, they were like, oh my gosh, but this feels so overwhelming. There's so many different things we could go with this, so many different places we could go with this. And I was like, yeah, but you don't have to do everything. You just have to find the overlap between your expertise, which they have a ton of, right? And what the clients, basically where their audience is, where their capabilities are. And then what do? We rapidly iterate. So we go through and do some experiments, basically, in other terms, and then scale up what works. So yeah, I just back up and second that process. We have gone in different directions, but came to basically a similar successful experience.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is so great. I mean, I could keep talking. I have more questions. I could go deeper into all these things, but I want to start to wind us into our lightning round. Are you ready for a few rapid fire questions?
You got it. I am ready.
Excellent. So what gets you up every morning that is not coffee?
Oh, I was going to say coffee. I love my morning cup of coffee, and I'm still going to say coffee because I have a morning routine. It's gotten more involved and less involved, but really I make sure that when I love getting up, I love my work. I get up every morning, I make myself a cup of coffee, and I sit and I look out the window, and it's a form of really basic meditation, and I make sure that I take that time for myself every day because it sets my day off well. But in the more kind of this lightning round, but I love what I do, and it's the most important thing I could be doing. And right now we're in a moment where there are these riots going on, and strong movement in violent and nonviolent ways to speak out against racism. And for the most part, when it's hard and when it's great, I personally feel quite content because I know the work I've chosen to do is already making the most positive impact on the world that I could be doing. And I go right back to my focus. I say, Sarah, you just keep doing what you've been doing every day, because every day you do the most that you can be doing as your one little blip on this earth. And that's plenty. It's a great amount.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate and respect your confidence in that. You're going deep, not wide. You're doing the work you do, and it's really important. And so, I sometimes struggle with, oh my gosh, I could be doing so much more, but also, you can only do so much. So
that's right. You can only put so much on your plate at once. And the more you stay focused, the more you will actually accomplish.
Yes, which brings us full circle to the beginning of the conversation.
That's right. Okay, the slowest lightning round ever, I know. So let's go.
Okay. What's the number one thing that you do to preserve your wellness?
Well, I have accountability partner, like say, I use all sorts of gimmicks, tricks, or whatever it takes to remind myself, force myself to take rest, to return my own process. I use the impact method in my business, and it officially has rest in it. I put rest on my calendar. I put breaks. I just block. I tell my assistant to make blocks. I had my assistant schedule massages for me in the past because I knew I wouldn't even schedule it myself. Whatever it takes, I know that. And I heard something this year that really made so much sense, is that changing from one routine to another or process to another, the change itself creates an immediate but temporary boost in effectiveness. So whenever I'm feeling stagnant, or I'm not taking my rest, or if I'm not doing anything else, I just change the way I'm doing something. I change the way I write my tasks out, or I change something in my routine to get that temporary boost. And I pull out all the stops to make sure I take enough time for myself.
Excellent. Are there any last words of wisdom that you want someone who's listening to this, a digital leader listening to this, to walk away with?
Well, I've said this before, and in various ways, I think we've said this whole session, is that finding good advice, finding wisdom is easy, especially if you're willing to pay for it. But following it is always the hard part. So pick any piece of great wisdom. It doesn't have to be the best, and do it. Actually make yourself do it. Whatever rules or tricks you need, bribe yourself if you need to. Make someone else hold you accountable. Make it an obstacle course, whatever you need, but follow that good advice.
Yes. So powerful. So true. All right, Sarah, why don't you tell the audience about how they can find out more about you, where they can check out anything that you might have for the world or for them?
Sure. PivotGround.com. That's the name of my business, PivotGround.com. And if you want to talk to me one-on-one, if you're a nonprofit leader, you're welcome to apply for a consultation call, which is actually a consultation call and not a sales call. And you're welcome to do that. You can find me on Facebook if you look for PivotGround, or on LinkedIn. Speaking of, flexing the muscle, I just can't make much of a presence on Twitter. So don't look for me there, and don't look for me on Instagram because I can't handle being there either. But you can email me too if you'd like, Sarah, SARAH at PivotGround.com.
Excellent. There you have it, folks. Thank you so much again, Sarah, for coming and talking to us about this. We'll have to come on another time and actually talk about the impact method and break that down. But yeah, just thank you. This has been wonderful.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Yes, as always, to all of our listeners, I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. If you're having a crappy day, I hope you can find even just 1 minute to create an awesome day, or at least an awesome moment for yourself. Take care, guys.